The Spotlight, shining a light on podcasts and videos that have caught our attention.
Hi and welcome to The Spotlight. I'm Jen Spiker and today I'm highlighting a video you'll find on the Vision app. Faith Runs Deep is a 12-part documentary series hosted by Karl Faase. In the series, Karl and his wife Jane travel the length and breadth of Australia in a Holden ute, unearthing stories of faith. Each episode covers a different theme or time in Australia's history. The documentaries have multiple contributors, and some of the extended interviews with these people are available to watch in the Vision app. One of these interviews is with historian Stuart Piggin. Stuart was director of the Centre for the History of Christian Thought and Experience at Macquarie University.
The Spotlight with Jen Spiker.
Tell us about some of the people who followed the convicts, because there were many free settlers and they began to make Australia. Someone like J.D. Lang, as the leader of Presbyterianism in those early years, what was he doing back in the UK in encouraging immigration to Australia?
Yeah, I think this is a very important matter, because I think that what we've done is to concentrate on our early convict history. Probably far more important in the development of Australia was the demographics of the people who came after the convicts, the settlers. Thus this book of James Bellick's called The Settler Revolution. It was a revolution. These were the hard-working, industrious, good-living, Bible-reading, daily praying immigrants that John Dunmore Lang and people like him really wanted. Dunmore Lang was not the only person who wanted people like that. So did our friend that on this monument over here, Robert Campbell. His son Charles brought out 70 Scottish families to work as tenant farmers and shepherds and people like that, and they were people who read the Bible every day. Or Samuel, or someone like Angus over in South Australia. He was responsible apparently for bringing out about a third of all colonists to South Australia. And he picked them very carefully because he thought that, he said it explicitly. He said the wealth of a nation is the industry and the energy of its people. The wealth of a nation is the industry and energy of its people. And South Australia is like that today, because South Australia doesn't have any resources, natural resources. All it's got is the energy and integrity of its people. So that's had a profound impact on a place like South Australia, because all the settlements in Australia are all different, And South Australia is unique in that particular respect.
Yeah. What are some of the waves in immigration? I mean, you've got if you could call him convicts immigration, and then you have these guys like Lang and Angus and Campbell recruiting, as it were, evangelicals. What are some of the major waves that happened after that of immigration to the country?
There were significant waves of immigrants from Highland Scotland, from Ireland, and from Wales. So a lot of the copper mines and the coal mines of South Australia and New South Wales, in case of coal mines, were occupied by Welshmen. Some of them couldn't even speak English, and Cornishmen, and they were strong Wesleyans, so they established strong Wesleyan communities. If you went to a place like Burra in South Australia, or Moonta, you'd have about 11 different Methodist churches of different types. You'd have one Anglican church, one Catholic church. So they're very, very strong. Then when you have, in the case of Scotland, a lot of them went to the northern part of New South Wales, became dairy farmers. They'd experienced revival in the islands of Scotland and in the Highlands of Scotland, and they brought revival with them.
The Mount Kembla revival. Tell us about that.
The Mount Kembla revival was an amazing event. It took place early in 1902. Mount Kembla is just one of many coal mines which dot the Illawarra coastline, really. And there was revival in each of those coal mining villages, one after another. Hundreds were added to the churches in those villages. 167 Mount Kembla, 292 at Helensburgh, and so on, all the way up the coast. It was quite remarkable. It was the work of an Australian Wesleyan revivalist called O'Donnell, and it's reported about in the local press, in the secular press, the Illawarra Mercury, at the time, and that's why I think it's so remarkable. The press in those days, it's just wonderful, all the details they give. So when a few months later you had the disaster, every word that anybody spoke, anything to do with all the disaster, is mentioned in full in the papers. You can just find out anything you want to know, really. So there are things like reports on why O'Donnell thought this was a genuine revival. He was asked for evidence of this, and he said things like the largest output that they've ever had in a single day has resulted at Mount Kembla after the revival. There is no longer a swear word heard in the mine, and the repayment of debts and all these sort of things. So they went on and on about the impact of the revival. But on the swearing bit, what amazed me was the report that the pit ponies stopped working because they could no longer understand the commands of the miners, because they now spoke with pure speech.
Wow.
And why I found that so moving was that that's what happened in Wales 2 years later at the Great Welsh Revival.
Yeah.
But it happened in New South Wales first.
Yeah. There were, as you discovered in some of your research, there are a number of different revivals, and one of them, which is a kind of an odd one, was the Light of the World painting that did a tour of Australia. Which is odd. So what's the painting, and what was the response?
Yes, I think that is a sign of revival. I think that in the first decade of the 20th century, from about 1902 through to about 1906, 7, 8, there was a lot of revival movements in Australia. It almost came close to a sort of awakening, perhaps a bit akin to the 1959 Billy Graham crusade, which had a broad impact on Australia. But this Light of the World thing, Holman Hunt painted the famous painting, Light of the World. He was a pre-Raphaelite artist. And the famous painting of Jesus knocking at the door of the heart. And he's carrying a lantern, being the light of the world. And it's a very beautiful painting. Anyway, he took it on a tour of the British Commonwealth, British Empire, as it was then. And when he took it to Adelaide, 18,000 people turned up to see it. When he took it to Melbourne, it was somewhere between 200 and 250,000 people who came to visit it. When he came to Sydney, it was 316,000, when the population of Sydney was 500,000.
Yeah.
Apparently they went through the turnstiles at the art gallery 3 every second in order to see this painting. And when they came to it, some of them bowed down before it, they knelt before it, some wept. Mothers instructed their children about what this was all about, told them to be good boys and girls. It was quite a thing. It just shows that Australians have had this spiritual need.
Yeah. So this is demonstrated when Billy Graham came to Australia. Why was the 1959 crusade unique?
Yes. Billy said afterwards that he'd never come across spiritual hunger like it in Australia. I think he felt especially called to come to Australia. He'd received lots of requests to go all over the place, but he felt that this was one that the Holy Spirit wanted him to obey and to go to Australia and take these crusades. And I suppose it was at the height of the Cold War. There was a lot of anxiety about declining moral standards, the bodges and the widgies and all that. And he clearly touched a nerve. He was at the height of his powers. The preaching was magnificent. He was so articulate. His preaching of the gospel was so pure. I did some research on him at Wheaton, and every afternoon for relaxation I got up a film of one of the crusades in Australia and just watched them, film after film, crusade after crusade. And there was not one that I didn't weep in.
Is that right?
Because it was just so perfect.
Wow.
I mean, it wasn't emotional. It was just perfect.
Wow. So he'd been in Melbourne, like he'd been all over the country. He'd been in Melbourne for weeks and weeks, and they had the final meeting at the MCG. What was that like?
143,000, I think, packed into the MCG, the largest crowd that's ever occupied that sacred turf. They even allowed them to walk on the turf, to sit on the turf, which people who are there as spectators normally aren't allowed. So they had this uniquely huge crowd. When I visited America to make a study of Billy Graham and went to the Billy Graham Centre in Minneapolis, there behind the secretary's desk was this huge picture of the Melbourne cricket ground with this huge crowd, because that was the largest crowd who had ever heard the gospel in history up to that point. Yeah. When they came to Sydney, they exceeded that because they used the showground and the SCG, both of them, the 156,000.
It's interesting. There's the interesting photo that actually has both of them together, and it's almost like it's hardly ever talked about, Stuart. But it's quite a remarkable event.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know why it's not talked about. I talk about it all the time. All right, I'd like to. I'd give the opportunity. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. It was an incredible thing. I mean, a quarter of Australian population went to hear Billy. Yeah. And 1.24% of the population accepted his invitation to come to Christ. This was pretty close to being a general awakening. The press were very pro-Billy. Yeah. Hardly anybody criticised him. They just thought he was marvellous. Yeah. Everybody thought he was marvellous. There was one paper that took him on, but that paper died an ignominious death because nobody bought it.
Stuart, were there other outcomes other than people, walking forward and saying, "Yes, I want to be a Christian"? What was the flow on in our culture?
Well, just like in the Illawarra, when this guy was asked about the genuine proofs of revival. There were genuine proofs of the impact of Billy Graham in 1959. I did a fair bit of research on this because my minister said to me, you'd have to, in order to prove that this was a genuine revival, you've got to prove that it made an impact beyond the church. Revivals are spiritual movements which spill out beyond the church into the wider community. So you've got to find evidence of that. So I looked up all the crime statistics, and I found that Australia, in Canberra, you have these all these crime statistics are kept, and Australia in the 1950s went downhill at a rate of knots. Huge increase in crime in the 1950s, and again in the 1960s. Now Billy Graham came in 1959, so I thought, oh well, no impact there. My minister said to me, you've got to look at the months and the years immediately after 59 if you're going to see this impact. And sure enough, the years where this massive decline flattened out and came to almost a standstill was just after 1959, Billy Graham. So I then looked at a couple of other non-criminal indices, like the number of children conceived out of wedlock. That also rose rapidly in the 50s and again in the 60s. But the years where it rose least was 1960. The children not conceived in 1959 weren't born in 1960. And then I looked at the amount of alcohol consumed, and that dipped contrary to trend by 10%. Yeah. The amount of beer drunk in 1960 was 10% lower than the year before. Yeah. It did make a definite impact.
On The Spotlight, we've been listening to a conversation between Karl Faase and historian Dr. Stuart Piggin. This is one of over a dozen extended interviews recorded for the Faith Runs Deep documentary series. There are interviews with Indigenous Australians, business people, a Vietnamese refugee, sports people, pastors and more. You can watch these inspiring interviews, plus the first episode of Faith Runs Deep, by tapping the Watch tab in the Vision app and scrolling to the Faith Runs Deep channel. If you have a favourite podcast or video series that you'd like to hear featured on The Spotlight, click Contact Us at vision.org.au and share the link. My name is Jen Spiker, and I look forward to joining you next time as I share another podcast or video that deserves highlighting.
For more great podcasts and videos like the one featured today, check out vision.org.au or the free Vision app.